Welcome back to another episode of Consumer Guide to Property Damage. Today we have Matt Mulholland with us. Matt is with National Claims Institute.
Yep.
And listen to this bull.
We have a lot of bull.
If you haven't seen Matt's podcast, I encourage you to go check out Listen to This Bull. So Matt, today I have a question that is burning for me and I need to understand what are our insurance companies talking about when they tell a policyholder they're going to send out an engineer?
Okay, so immediate red flags should go up for you.
It's interesting. Doug Quinn said the same thing. If they say engineer, you need to understand you're in conflict.
Yeah.
So that's an immediate red flag of conflict.
I mean, there's exceptions, obviously, but generally speaking, if they're sending out an engineer, you can assume, and you should at least assume, that they are doing what they can to put together an expert report that allows them to deny the claim reasonably. Because they have to have a basis for their denial that is a reasonable basis. And them relying on the input of an expert is a reasonable thing to do when trying to determine if there is coverages. So they'll send out an engineer. The engineer will write an expert report. It's a third-party opinion. So that is a reasonable basis.
It's looked at as independent.
It's thought of that way. So that way the insurance company doesn't look like they're acting in bad faith, basically. Okay. So, but there's issues with that system. Big issues with that system.
I one time needed to hire an engineer for a job, and I called 3 or 4 different engineer companies in the Salt Lake area, and all of them said, sorry, we only work for the insurance companies.
That's
really?
One of those issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the ones that only work for insurance companies, they only get their business from them. As you can imagine, if you got all your business from one place, and that one place said, hey, listen, can you start doing things just slightly differently for us? Would you say no and lose their business and suddenly have no clients? Or would you slightly bend the way that you do things in order to make sure that you still have money coming in to support your family?
Well, that's a great point. So, I mean, essentially that puts, that kind of sheds a little bit of a darker cloud over this, because now suddenly you have to say, how much is someone willing to bend in that case?
And when does it become fraud?
And when does it become fraud?
I can't answer the second part.
No, that's okay.
That's the hard
that
thing.
Was more. I mean, Doug Quinn did talk about that, so
That's
you can
good.
watch one of Doug's videos. But I think the times when I've seen an engineer get involved is typically a homeowner is requesting a reinspection because they weren't satisfied with their first inspection, and the insurance company will call back and say, we're going to be sending an engineer out.
I mean, there are times when, because the adjuster just doesn't know what they're looking at,
so maybe
and they want an
verification.
actual expert opinion. So it does happen where there isn't any conflict at all. Mm-hmm. But you don't know when those times are, so this is why it should be a red flag. You should treat it as if there is a conflict. So I like the idea of using this as a rule of thumb. Just assume this is going to be utilized against you.
So what would you do? What should you do the second you hear an engineer is coming? I mean, Doug talked about, requesting their license, making an appointment. He had a few different things that he listed. But what is the very first thing that a homeowner needs to do? Should it hire a public adjuster? Do they need to get an attorney? Do they hire their own engineer? What does that look like?
All of those options are good. Getting your own engineer can be beneficial if you get the right kind. So it might be better to start off by either getting a public adjuster involved or an attorney, but really you need to ask the insurance company, why? What needs more clarification for you? Mm-hmm. Is it you don't believe that the peril, I'm teasing her, you don't believe that the peril is accurate that we've claimed, you think it was something else and you want somebody else's opinion of it?
Will you explain peril? Because I made a joke about that, but we have not had anybody explain that word.
All right, this is a different episode.
Sorry, just real quick, in a couple words, Matt, I know that's difficult
TV
for you.
magic has happened. So peril is a cause of loss. Hail is a peril. It can cause damage. Wind is a peril. Poor Jen over here has.
I have oysters as a peril.
Yeah, she read it as pearl for many, many years.
Drastically different.
If you ever became a public adjuster, you should have a PA firm called the Black Pearl Public Adjuster.
There you go. There you go. And all of us and America will understand what that means. I'm just glad I never said that in public until a little bit ago.
Till today.
And I'll never live it down. Okay, so thank you for explaining that. I do appreciate it.
All right, so if an engineer is coming out, you got to find out why. And you got to find out what it is they're being asked to do. Specifically, very specifically, what have they been asked to do? That's called their assignment. They would call it their scope of work.
And they might say something like, we're being sent to verify that something is there, that, you know, whatever, it could be clarification, it could be verification.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a very broad, open-ended assignment,
It's probably not good.
not good. If the carrier says, well, we need to know what caused the damage, then the engineer should be able to say, I've been asked to identify what caused the damage. If they say something different, then you've got something going on in the background that you're not aware of. You need to find out exactly what it is that they're being asked to do. Once you know what they're being asked to do, it might be determine the extent of hail damage on your property, determine the cause of the water damage on your ceilings. Whatever it is that they've been asked to do, now you have to find out if the person they're sending out is competent in figuring that out. Because engineers are not allowed to act against their own competency. So
Because they are licensed.
it's an ethical issue for engineers, and in many states it's illegal for them to act outside their competency.
And there's
states.
different types of engineers, right? So I think that that's something that people need to understand. It isn't like a lawyer who might be competent in everything, although they don't specialize. They practice a specific type of law. With engineers, there's actually different type. There's structural engineers. There's
Mechanical,
Chemical, nuclear,
yeah.
software,
software.
There we go. Yes.
yeah, cosmetic engineers.
I don't know that I would want a software engineer assessing my roof.
Right. So they'll call themselves forensic engineers, though, but that is not a field of study that they can get any kind of a degree in. So mechanical engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers, these are the kind of people that generally will go out and then start calling themselves a forensic engineer when they're trying to identify the cause of something. So they're going back through the history of whatever something is. So they'll call themselves that, but that doesn't mean that they have competency in what they're looking at. No, they didn't design these materials. They didn't engineer how this roof is built or how this siding is designed. They didn't do that. So if they didn't do that, what are they even allowed to talk about with that particular material? Are they competent in being able to identify whether or not hail did cause this kind of damage? But the real fun thing about all this is a lot of times they'll step outside their competency in the reports that they end up writing, regardless of whether they're competent for that material. They'll start talking about weather. You're not a meteorologist.
Or they'll say it's cosmetic damage.
Yeah, well, so that's a terminology issue, and I do want to touch on that in a second, because that's the biggest rub of all the engineer issue. But if you can at least identify what it is that they're being sent out to do, and then identify if they're competent. Ask them for a copy of their CV. Ask them for their professional resume.
And I think if you have not watched our episode with Doug Quinn, when we talked about the American Policyholders Association and so forth, Doug also mentions the requesting a copy of their CV and what that is and what that means. So make sure you go back and watch that episode too for a little more clarification.
Doug Quinn is also a very sexy man too, so that'll help if you want to go watch that episode. So anyway, get a copy of their CV, their curriculum vitae, their business resume, their professional resume, and it'll tell you, what courses they've taken, what certifications they had, what they've been doing for years. If there's nothing in there that even remotely relates to the loss that you have, then this person should not be the engineer that's sent out. And you can request somebody else. Hey, Mr. Adjuster, I looked over the CV of this engineer. You're asking him to do this, but his CV doesn't show any competency in that whatsoever. Can you please make sure somebody else is sent out that is competent in this? And then if you can keep them from going outside their competency, that's the hard part. That's where having a public adjuster or an attorney involved in this process can really help.
Right, because I think for a lot of consumers that would be overwhelming, right? To ask for this, and now I'm having to read this CV, and I'm trying to figure out what it means, and how much time is this going to take me, and now I have to tell my insurance company I need another engineer, and I'm going to have to request a CV for that. And it is very advantageous to have somebody that's going to advocate and do those things on your behalf.
Let me say this, getting to a level where you are feeling good about how you handle claims takes years of practicing and applying policies and things. So it's very unlikely, not impossible, very unlikely that a policyholder is going to be able to navigate that stress-free without having to have an enormous amount of learning curve all at once.
Especially when most people never have a claim in their lifetime, and if you do have one, it's not something that you're going to likely see repeated over and over again. So learning these things and navigating that for a one-time incident, that can be cumbersome.
Their point of reference is usually in an auto accident or something, and they're handled completely differently.
And a lot of the reason we're doing this series is so people understand what to do and where to go, right? We don't expect that consumers are now all of a sudden going to be able to take on the whole claim process alone and fight the insurance companies, right? But they do need to understand what resources are available. You do need to understand what to ask when getting a policy so that you have the proper coverage.
And you should not feel bad that you don't understand this process.
Not at all.
It is a crazy process. So.
Designed really from the get-go to be stacked against you. Let's be honest, it really is. And I'm not, and there's lots of things in life that way, but it's the same reason there are doctors and lawyers and all of those things. Nobody wants Crystal doing heart surgery, right? I'm not trained for that. At the end of the day, a policyholder who bought, a homeowner who bought a policy didn't go into this thinking that they needed to know what a CV is and all of these things. So this is to just simply bring together the resources of who do I even reach out to help me with this.
Absolutely.
So if you're okay with it, let's talk about terminology and how this whole system is built against you with the engineers.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, absolutely.
We got time, right? So engineers that are sent out, this is I teach classes on this, and anyway, I'm very passionate about this particular subject. The terms in an insurance policy have a very specific meaning. It's semantics. If you change that terminology slightly, it changes how the benefits of that policy are paid out. So they have very specific meaning. And it's almost like jargon, insurance jargon over here. Engineers have their own jargon. They have words that they say all the time that mean something to other engineers, but it doesn't mean the same thing to a layman. It definitely doesn't mean the same thing as what the insurance policy is saying. And it might be the same term, but have two completely different meanings.
Depending upon who's saying it.
Depending on who's saying it. And that is used against you. If a report is written with those terms in the way that the engineer would write it, meaning the way the engineer is saying it, then to a layman or to an insurance company reading that, it will be interpreted differently depending on who's reading it.
Like, for example, cosmetic damage?
Cosmetic damage is a good one. I'll give you a better one. I have seen in reports very often the terminology, the damage was not consistent with hail. What does that mean?
It's a great question.
Most laymen that read that would believe that it wasn't caused by hail. And the engineer is saying that it wasn't caused by hail. And he's saying it because it's not consistent with hail. What an engineer is actually saying is, that's weird.
Never seen this before.
Yeah,
There's damage.
that's all they're saying.
It just
Not
doesn't look like
consistent.
normal.
That's so strange. I'm kind of excited to see how this hail really affected this because it's not what I expected. It doesn't mean it wasn't hail. But that kind of terminology,
Wow.
you know what I mean?
So the outcome of that simple statement could be used by maybe the carrier to say, this is what the engineer said, so we're going to deny your claim. When in fact, the engineer was just saying, well, this hail wasn't round. It was like square. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
I think the most important part in that is that there was damage.
Right.
Right? Like the fact that the engineer is acknowledging that there's damage. It's weird. Not exactly sure what it is, but the point is that there's damage. And I think that's where
I think it comes down to very simple statements, and you have to read into a policy or into an engineer report thinking this. If they specifically state this was not caused by hail, then it wasn't caused by hail. If they specifically state that it was not damaged, then it wasn't damaged. Maybe. I'll get into damage in a second. But if they say it wasn't caused by hail especially, or wasn't caused by wind, or wasn't caused by this, then for the most part, that is what they mean. There might be some hidden information that they're not telling you about. Damage is one of those words that everybody uses differently. Damage in an insurance policy means something very different from damage to an engineer. Engineers might actually define what they are meaning by damage in their report. They might not, but generally they're going to define it because damage from one engineer to the next might be slightly differently. There's thresholds to this stuff. When do they believe that a product has been damaged? So for most courts of law across the country, damage means a distinct, demonstrable, meaning it's demonstratable, physical alteration, something changed, a detrimental physical alteration. Let's flop those around. So it got worse. It didn't get better after the hail hit it. Distinct, demonstrable, detrimental, physical alteration to tangible property.
That's a lot of
You
work.
can measurably show that something has been affected negatively by covered peril, and that something that's damaged is your covered property, then you have damage according to an insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they say otherwise. Some of them have additional information on that, but for the vast majority of them, if you can just show that it was affected negatively, then it's damaged. For an engineer, it might not be damaged unless it has reduced its expected service life. It might be physically altered in a negative way. Materials have warranties. Does that specify exactly how long that material is actually going to last?
No. It's an expected.
Right. This couch has probably a 10-year warranty, but if I maintain it, it might last 50 years. I don't know. It might be particle board, it might not.
But if you let your dog lay on it and, tear the cushions and whatever, it might last 3 years.
You
So
know, the
what's
way
the-
that I like to explain hail damage to homeowners is it's like a beaded dress, right?
Okay.
So when you have a beaded dress and you catch it and you lose a few beads, it's not super noticeable. There's not a lot of problems with the dress at that moment. You might be able to wear it a few more times, but every time you wear it, a couple more beads come off and a couple more beads come off till all of a sudden
Now you
all
have a
of the
hole.
beads are gone, or you have a hole and it's too late to return the dress because it's, you've worn it 5 or 6 times now, but now the beads have created such a problem you can never wear the dress again, and that dress that should have lasted you a really long time because you lost those first couple beads, now the dress is ruined, even though you've never done anything else to it.
I really like the beaded dress idea, especially as granules on a shingle or something like that. It's a very similar progression. But that's a good point then. Let's talk about granules on a shingle. If granules are removed, has it reduced the expected service life of the material? If the warranty on that material is 30 years, but in reality, the roof might have lasted 50, but it's still going to last 30 years after the hail hits it. But because the hail hit it, it's not going to last the 50, it's only going to last 40. It still, to an engineer, has not been damaged because it's going to last its expected service life. from a policy standpoint, it has been reduced, it has been negatively affected and physically altered, it has still been damaged. So,
And it would be a financial loss to that homeowner to not be able to have those extra 10 or 15 years of shingle life, correct?
They're gonna have to pay to replace that roof sooner than they would have otherwise.
So it sounds like an engineer can use the same wording, but it could be left up to the carrier to decide how they want to use that, the context of what the engineer said. Does
Well, I
that
just
work
think
for the
even-
policyholder or against the policyholder?
I think in general, whether it's up to the carrier, if it's up to the consumer, we don't read engineer, right? And we're programmed to understand language more as what it's written in our policy, because I would identify damage the way that the insurance company did, right? When Matt laid it out, I wouldn't think of damage the way an engineer thinks of damage. I'm not an engineer for a reason.
But it's exactly the reason we're doing what we're doing, because somebody would need to know that they need to seek out the advice of somebody that does speak engineering.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you're both right on that. You know, the layman is gonna read this differently, and they're going to assume that when the insurance company inevitably says, because the report says it wasn't damaged by hail, and the carrier's gonna say, well, it wasn't damaged by hail according to our experts, so we're denying the claim. Policyholder's gonna read that and go, well, what's up with my contractor? Why is he lying to me? This engineer knows what they're talking about. But if they know that that term is just being used differently, then they can understand what's going on. The funny thing is, you were dead on the issue. The engineering firms are leaving it up to the carrier to interpret it, and if needing more information, they're waiting on the carrier to ask them for clarification.
Got it.
So they are specifically, we know this because it's written into their own blogs on their websites, these engineering firms. So, and they recognize that the term damage means something else to a policy. But they aren't asking for the insurance company's definition of this so that they could use the same definition. They're just using their own definition and letting the insurance company say, well, that's not our definition. There might still be coverage in that. What insurance company is going to read, hail did not damage this roof, and think, do you think they use the word damage the way that we use it?
Well, that's what I'm
No.
saying. Like, I realize that we speak kind of, different languages in this particular case, and it may not always be intentional. I said may, we're here not from a non-biased standpoint, and there are bad people in every side. There may be people that read it intentionally that way and know what they're doing. But I don't believe that everybody does. I believe more people err on being ignorant around it, like I am, and unknowledgeable, which is why we're doing this. But it's important for people to have experts, and I think that is the biggest thing is that we want to get across here is if your insurance company is hiring an engineer, whether it's from an adverse reaction or not, you want to assume that you're in conflict, and you need to find an expert to help support you through that. Even if you find that you're not in conflict, it's still better to err on the side of caution, because it's clear that we don't all speak the same language.
Right.
Again, recapping what Matt was saying is you want to make sure you're asking those questions at the beginning. Another thing I think is making sure they make an appointment.
Absolutely.
They're not just allowed to show up. That they, if I remember correctly, that you tell them my contractor is going to be present, my public adjuster and or whoever that is, along with my own engineer will be present, and you will be recorded.
Good.
Yeah. Those
Must record.
Yes, you must record these things. Those things are important, and you're not recording it to go throw it up on YouTube and bash the engineer. That is not why you do things like this. You're recording it for your own protection and to keep people honest. When people know that they're being recorded, they're much more
They do
inclined
things a little differently.
to do things and not miss any steps and to cross every T and to dot every I, and that's what you should expect as a consumer. I think that those are the main things that people need to know when engineers get hired, and we're really passionate about this because as contractors and as a public adjuster, we've been in these situations. I've had a claim where a consumer, they hired an engineer, and when I went to email, my email was blocked. And I emailed 6 times and every time it was blocked. And I know that they can't block us. You know, we had at that time an assignment of claim, and they did not want to talk to me as the contractor that didn't want to answer any questions. And so yes, it's passionate, it's close to home, and it can get emotional and fueled because we're so passionate about what's best for consumers, and that's hard.
Let me say this. Most of the information that I've gathered over the years on how to navigate these waters has come from the individuals on the other side telling me the BS that's going on and how to work within those waters in order to make sure that they can do their job properly. Because most of them that you're meeting with are sick and tired of having their hands tied to. Most of the people you're meeting with on site are good people.
They are.
And I teach. It's very easy to explain all the horrendous things that happen in insurance claims because those are the big war stories. They're more fun to talk about. They teach us a lot. But the average claim isn't a war story. It's some miscommunication and misapplied small things that lead to problems. So,
and again, insurance companies are businesses. Right? And they are for-profit businesses, the majority of them, and they have stockholders and a board of directors and people that they have to answer to, and there's expectations around that. And yes, I think it's broken. I don't think it should work that way. We talked about that in our episode with Chip. However, it is where we're at right now, and having understanding around that and getting that, you know, in reality, their job is to mitigate the loss, meaning reduce the amount of money it costs the company. Your job as a homeowner is to get your claim paid. And the goal is to find a reasonable and equitable balance in that. And sometimes you can't. And when you can't, there are professionals out there that can help support you in that. And you need to know who those are. You need to know how to vet them. You need to know who you can trust. You need to know how to find good quality people. But don't assume that everything is going to be bad, because as Matt just said, the majority of claims are not as adversary as some of these other situations that we're talking about. But you do need to be prepared because you never know when it's your claim that's going to go south.
It's true. Yeah. I always like to say, make the assumption that it's not on purpose what's happening to you, and apply that logic when you're talking to them. If you go at it thinking they're screwing you on purpose, then it's probably not going to go very well.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's personal. It's your home.
It's very emotional.
Yeah, it's your home, and we understand that. And you know, what is it? You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. There's times when vinegar becomes necessary. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't stand up for yourself, because you absolutely should stand up for yourself.
Just understand that you have resources that can help you navigate
But
what
you can,
that looks
and
like.
that you can start where Matt is saying that, assuming that it was a mistake or assuming that it was an error and it wasn't done, you know, intentionally or from bad faith, and navigate from that.
Absolutely.
I mean, right now, the only thing that's running through my mind is taking a jar, putting honey and vinegar in it, and stirring
seeing
it up.
what happens.
And seeing what
And
happens.
seeing how many flies we can catch with that.
Let's go do that.
Right?
That sounds like a really good time.
That's a trap.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us and doing this. You know, this episode on engineering, it's really prevalent in this industry at this time, more so than I've ever seen in the last 15 to 20 years. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for watching.